Okay, I think we're ready to dive into the beginning and the text of the Psalms. Today our text starts with Psalm 54. Today our text starts with Psalm 54. It actually includes 4 of the Psalms, and to be honest, I've debated about the best way to go through them because sometimes it covers them at a little bit more depth. Sometimes it just sort of zips across them. You know, this text I haven't been quite as fond of as the other volumes that we were using. It goes a little bit faster over things, and the Old Testament is different, like you can feel it. I'm not sure that I like it quite as much as the Gospels, but in a way that's okay. Like, this is a part of our heritage, and I think it's really important to go through. All of these Psalms that they chose are Psalms that notes, or the notes with them are like David on the run from Saul, David fighting the Ziphites, David having to hide in the cave, those kinds of things. And there's a lot of Psalms like this. I don't think I've paid so much attention to the titles and the ascriptions of the Psalms before. There's a lot of them that are written about these times of difficulty. Why do you think that is? Why would they write about times of difficulty so often?
Because that's what they were living. That's what they were experiencing. We tend to write about what we know.
Because that's what they were living? That's what they were experiencing? Yeah, I think that's part of it. Anything else? They give us a template of where to turn. Yeah, I think that's another piece of it. It seems to me like there are all of these psalms and prayers in times of affliction, because times of affliction are difficult. And when you're in the middle of it, it is very, very hard to have the right attitude. It's easy to get caught up in yourself or to look at your own things, sometimes just to feel sad, or situations can be fairly rotten. It's not even something that's, it's not like there's fault in it or there's sin in it. Like, sometimes we just are a bit out of it. Sometimes we're sad, sometimes we're caught up in what is happening, especially when it's not good. It can feel very overwhelming, and it gets to a point where it's hard to remember what God is doing. But I think that's where these Psalms become so important. They help, they're meant to give us a different perspective. They're meant to help shape our attitude and our mind, to give us a place to turn. And lots of them have this kind of balance in them that I've started to notice. The psalmist, or the prayer, will complain about a situation for a while and talk about what's happening and what's going on. And then the perspective will switch, and it will turn toward God, asking Him for salvation, praising His goodness, speaking of the wonders that He has done, talking about remembering His deeds, all of those different kinds of things. And I think there's something very instructive in that kind of movement for us. It's like it helps teach us to acknowledge our difficulty and to see it and to sit in it, but not to be stuck there, not to just stay there forever, that we need to turn our hearts toward good things. We need to turn our hearts toward the Lord and His blessings and what He is doing, because otherwise, lots of you have had this experience, I'm sure. If you don't turn your eyes toward good things, what happens? the darkness just kind of eats you. You can get stuck, and stuck in a kind of deep way that's very, very hard to get out of. And it just seems like there's a wisdom here in the scriptures, in these prayers, that highlights the importance of admitting the difficulty, but not staying there forever, not sitting in it constantly and repeatedly for long periods of time, because we do get caught up in it. Negative things definitely have gravity. And so this first one asks God to save me by your might, vindicate me, hear my prayer. Strangers are attacking me, ruthless men seek my life. But then here's kind of the turn. Surely God is my help. The Lord is the one who sustains me. This one's a little bit more vindictive. Let evil recoil on those who slander me. In your faithfulness, destroy them. So this one kind of goes after the people attacking him a little bit more than some of the other ones do. But you can kind of feel that movement and that balance, not staying in the difficulty, not staying in the challenge forever. Psalm 57 is one when he fled from Saul into the cave. Have mercy on me, O God, have mercy on me, for in you my soul takes refuge. I am in the midst of lions, I lie among ravenous beasts. My heart is steadfast, O God, my heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music. Awake, my soul, awake, harp and lyre. I will awake the dawn. I think there's something about this kind of thing again. It feels a little bit projection-y to me. When you're in this place of difficulty, when you're in a cave and it's dark, thinking of awaking the dawn and the coming of light isn't, again, that first thing on your mind. It's not what is most present to you. The current darkness probably is most present because you can't see anything. But the psalmist again turns toward that kind of sunrise. That light does rise in the darkness, and good things do come after the spring comes after winter. Good things come after the rain. It talks about praising the Lord among the nations, and this is that important key word in the life of Israel, because the way that they divide the world is into the Jewish people and everyone else are the nations. So I will praise you, O Lord, among the nations. I will sing of you among the peoples. It's talking about something that's much wider spread than Judaism alone. It's talking about the multiple peoples of the world that discover this deeper relationship with the Lord. And in some ways, maybe it applies more directly to the situation of David, because David leaves the people of Israel and goes to live with the Philistines for a while. That's a big part of the chapters today. Psalm 63. I'm trying to remember if this is the one. No, this isn't like as the deer longs for the springs of water. But this one is very familiar if you pray morning prayer or evening prayer, if you've ever done that, like with iBreviary or something. Psalm 63 comes up a lot. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I think this is one. I think this is one that, oh yeah, there it is. I note that the first line should include at dawn. O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. Earnestly means, like, in this case, like the first thing of the day. that as soon as you wake up, you seek the Lord. And I think that at the first rays of dawn, early in the morning, becomes an important phrase because there's an event that's going to happen liturgically in a couple of weeks. We celebrate Easter, and the women go out to the tomb early in the morning. They're seeking the Lord. And it seems like this psalm fits with that context better. You would recall that moment of going out to Jesus' tomb as an echo of this psalm, as long as the psalm highlights that in the morning I seek you, like the first thing of my day. I have seen you in the sanctuary. Now this presents an interesting problem because the psalm is written, or the context of the psalm is in the deserts of Judah, when David is out in the deserts of Judah. But if David is in the deserts of Judah, what is the sanctuary of the Lord? Everywhere. That's an option. It seems like the option that we want to say right away is the temple in Jerusalem, right? Like usually when it talks about the sanctuary, the house of God, it's thinking of the temple in Jerusalem, but there's a problem. There's no temple in Jerusalem yet. It hasn't been built. It's not built in the time of David at all. It's built in the time of his son Solomon. So what sanctuary is this? I think everywhere is a possibility. Seeing and seeking God in the wild, in the wilderness. There's a deep stream of that in Christianity that has continued for a long time. It could be, future looking toward the temple in Jerusalem, future looking toward the completion of the temple under Solomon. There were temples. If you remember, Samuel lived at Ramah, and I don't know if we know of a temple there, but there was also the temple at Shiloh that had been, I think, where Eli and his sons were, where the ark got taken from, after they took it out into battle against the Philistines. There was a temple there. It could be that. Sometimes when you encounter these kind of things, even in the Psalms, I think it's just important to let your mind be expansive, to ponder some of these different possibilities, these different openings, these different things that it could mean. Because, again, we can fall into this trap of thinking that the Scriptures mean one thing. There's one plain meaning of the Bible, and if we discover the plain meaning of the words, then we've got it. And the more that I approach the text, the more often I approach the text, the more I realize that there's layered meanings here. There's a bunch of different things going on, and some of it can be multiple and varied. This, I think, is one of the really, really strong images of the search for God, because it says, in a dry, weary land where there is no water, I seek the Lord like someone who is dying of thirst in the desert. That's a very dramatic kind of search for God. That's not, I seek the Lord, He's going to add a little salt to my meat and make it taste a little bit better. I seek the Lord because life is better with Him and it's going to be just a little bit better. In this case, it's, I seek the Lord like this dry and weary land where there is no water. And if you've been east of Jerusalem in the Holy Land, if you've been down by the Dead Sea, you know that it feels like a land without water. The Dead Sea isn't even very friendly because it's dead. It's so salty that nothing lives there. You can't drink the water, it will kill you. It's so salty that, like, if you swallow a mouthful of it, they have to take you to the ER, and you get sick enough that some people die. Like, they warn you about that. It's not a It's not a nice place. And the land is dry. Dry. Drier than the Sahara Desert dry. At least most of the year. And it's often over 100 degrees because it's well below sea level. Psalm 142. This is another psalm of David when he was in the cave. I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out my complaint before him. Before him I tell my trouble. When my spirit grows faint within me, it is you who know my way. In the path where I have walked, men have hidden a snare for me. Look to my right and see, no one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. I cry to you, O Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Rescue me from those who pursue me. Set me free from my prison, that I may praise your name. Again, it has that kind of balance. It's not just negative. It's not just stuck in what's happening to the psalmist. It's a prayer in need, very much so. It's a prayer to be freed from prison. And it's a prayer to be freed from those things that hold us bound. Again, I think that is a beautiful meditation or a beautiful direction to take it. The things that hold us bound. You know, what holds you bound in your life? Where do you feel like you're in a prison or you're in difficulty? Sometimes it can be something that's internal to us. You might even know it. I mean, one of the more difficult things is when you know that something isn't right, but you can't always change it. I was visiting with a friend who has had some sensitivities to this kind of thing in the past, but in her last pregnancy got very, very nauseous to the point where she had to go into the ER and really get treated for it. Evidently, it was a very hard pregnancy for her. And now she noted that at the slightest bit of nausea, she starts to feel almost panic and a kind of panic attack. And she knows that it's not real, that nausea is a normal kind of thing, that you experience this, you get illnesses, you get sick, you recover. But now it's like her body remembers the intensity of that difficulty, and it does its own thing whether she wants it to or not. Some of you may have experiences like that where, like, our body can be injured, we can get infections. We don't usually think of it this way, but our mental state, our psychology can also get those same kind of injuries. And psychologically, things can get broken just as much as physically. And the psychological wounds don't heal as easily. They don't heal as readily. It tends to take a lot more work. And so I think there's things like that can hold us bound. There's things in our physical lives. Sometimes people who have struggles with various things feel very bound by that, whether it's finances or friendship or loneliness or difficulties with children who have chosen to live in a different way or an unhealthy way. There's a lot of different possibilities for ways that we can feel bound. And so I think this is a good prayer and a good spot to meditate on that. Any questions on the Psalms so far?
I just wonder if, the point that you had made about the balance and, recognizing our difficulty but not staying there. To me, when the Psalms have that, it's almost like the first part is about our body and the second part is about our soul. And our soul needs to be directing our body, so we need to be
Yeah.
towards that latter both body and soul. Our prayer needs to be a combination.
So Patty's mentioning like our prayers need to be, or it's good if they have that kind of balance, body and soul. Sometimes it seems to start with this physical experience and move into more of a spiritual one. That's a good movement. And when we pray, I think we experience that both and very often. Sometimes things can be chaotic in our body and tranquil in our soul. Sometimes things can be tranquil in our body, that there's not a whole lot going on physiologically, but there can be great turmoil spiritually. So it can be both. In the Holy Land, as we jump back into the text of 1 Samuel, one thing that isn't always at the forefront of our mind is that there's lots of groups of people that are living in the land. When the Israelites conquer the land in the time of Joshua, they don't kick out everyone kind of like they're supposed to. There's these various groups of people that remain. The Philistines live along the coast. The Jebusites live in Jerusalem. The earlier name of Jerusalem is this Jebus. So the Jebusites live in that area. David's the one that conquers Jerusalem. It was a city built on top of some hills. That was a very significant challenge to take. It was a walled city, and it was difficult. And he ultimately finds his way in. But it was very much a military victory. I think the Jebusites taunt him, like, even the walls will keep you out. Like, we don't even need defenders. You can't get in. And then David gets in, of course, because you should be familiar that ultimately the capital is founded in Jerusalem, and that's taken as the king's territory. The Hittites are a group that lived further north, and I think several of the people in the line of the Messiah, these Hittites show up in some different ways. There's some different groups around the area, but they're another tribe of people. And there's likely others. There's Canaanites that live there. The Amalekites, we're going to get to them. They kind of get the short end of the stick in the scriptures. The Amalekites, as one professor that I had noted, never survive the scene that they're in. If there's an Amalekite, they always end up dead. And some of it, I think, is because the Amalekites are an image of this worldly opposition to the plan of God, of the revolt against what is the will of God. They're the first people that attack ancient Israel after the Exodus, and they become symbolic of this kind of opposition of things to the will of God. Remember that Israel is at the crossroads of many nations, between the Assyrians to the north and the east. They're in the northern part of modern-day Iraq, near Mosul is where Nineveh is, that's their capital, and the Egyptians off to the west. Those are the two major warring powers at this time in history. There isn't a lot of cohesive social organization. So we think of Saul as a king, but Saul as a king doesn't rule with the same kind of authority that David will later, or that Solomon will especially. There's not the social cohesion. So yes, he's the king, but he rules probably over a limited environment. It's not the whole country of Israel. It's not the whole region. There's these other peoples dwelling there. They make raids. They go on attacks. They do all of these kinds of things. There is some crossover between Israel and the Gentile nations. You can see it in David. David hires himself out as a mercenary to the Philistines. He and his army become soldiers of fortune. I think the book rightly notes that this has a little bit of a diminished sense in our own day, a little bit of like, this is a negative thing, being a soldier of fortune or being a mercenary. On the other hand, it in the Bible, it doesn't seem to have that same kind of sense. I mean, you could argue in a way that all soldiers are soldiers of fortune, because if they don't get paid, they tend to revolt and riot. And when they have the weapons and the training, they tend to get what they want. So in chapter 27, David is forced to flee. David had spared Saul's life. This was where he had the water jug and the spear. He makes Saul send a messenger to come and get them. But David he's thinking to himself, one of these days I will be destroyed by the hand of Saul. He knows that Saul, despite all of his promises, is probably still going to try to kill him again and again and again and again. And so his answer is ultimately that he has to leave. So he goes to Gath. Gath is this Philistine city. I think this is where Goliath was from, Goliath of Gath. So David's been through there a few times. And this time he goes to the king, Achish, and he asks for a place to settle. And so he's given this town of Ziklag. And that doesn't sound like an important name to us, but when it happens, you should remember that, because a couple chapters later, the Amalekites are going on a raid and they attack Ziklag and they take all of their wives and children into captivity. So that's going to become a plot point in a little bit. For now, it's just Ziklag. Who knows why it's called Ziklag, but that's what it is. It's a town closer to the Philistine area, and this is a time where David feels safer. He and his men, 600 men, settle in Ziklag, and they have their family. David has his 2 wives. Again, we kind of talked about that before. When Saul was told that David had fled to Gath, he no longer searched for him. So David was right. If he fled the country of Israel, Saul wasn't going to try and kill him. Because Saul's dominating trait is what? Saul is afraid. Saul is afraid especially of the Philistines. Saul had seen God's deliverance of his army when David slew Goliath, but he still doesn't believe. He's still afraid of the Philistines. And so when David hides in the country of the Philistines, Saul isn't going to go get him because it's the Philistines. So David is given the city of Ziklag. He then sets out and he raids these groups of people, the Geshurites, the Girzites, and the Amalekites. So again, there's these peoples that are living there. Many of them seem to be living down further into the desert. They're nomads. They roam around and they raid places. They cause problems. This is something, again, that we are just not used to very much in the modern world. In the ancient world, going out on your own, like if you were a merchant or if you needed to go to another city, you didn't set out alone, or you very rarely did. There was much more safety in numbers because there were these groups and these raiding parties and these people that would just raid and raid and raid and raid. And so the roads weren't necessarily safe. You don't think like, oh, I can't drive to Bismarck because the road's not safe in North Dakota, except in the case of things like winter weather or ice or different kinds of things. Like those are our considerations. But in the ancient Holy Land, it was you don't go to Bismarck because you might die along the way and people might steal all your stuff. And their journeys were rarely hundreds of miles like that. So these are all ancient enemies of Israel. They're all these groups of people. When David attacks them, he does not leave anyone alive. Now that's a pretty harsh thing. It doesn't make a lot of sense to us, but it seems to be part of this plan that David is working. There's a little bit of scheming going on here. He doesn't leave people alive because he doesn't want them to go back to Achish and tell him who David has actually been raiding, because there's this play going on. David sort of gently implies that he's raiding the towns of Israel, like a good Philistine would be expected to do, that he's fighting against Saul. But in David's case, he's not actually fighting against Saul, he's fighting against these peoples that are the ancient enemies of Israel. So he's not fighting his own kin, he's not fighting his own tribe, he's fighting other people. And he wants to make sure that the king doesn't hear any differently, that he doesn't want a different message to get back to the king. So Achish seems to be a little bit suspicious, and he's like, so where are you doing all these raids? Where are you getting all this spoil and plunder? You know, you're a very successful guy. Who are you raiding? David's like, oh, well, it's kind of in the wilderness. It's over there. You know, it's by these bushes, you know, close to the desert, those kinds of places. And it's not an outright lie, but it's certainly fudging. It's certainly allowing the king to have the impression that he's attacking his own people when he's not. And it's hard to say, like, is this a good thing? David is definitely compromising on the truth. He talks about going out into the Negev of Judah, that's the desert, that's this desert, or the Negev of the Kenites, or Kenites, whoever they are. You know, is David actually lying? What is David's responsibility here? And I think the waters are a little bit murky. It's hard to say. I mean, lying is against the Ten Commandments. Lying to your enemies is not, it doesn't seem to allow exceptions to the rule. But at the very least, it doesn't seem like you must apply the commandment to situations of life and death. It gets hard, and it really is hard. Like, if a woman is in an abusive relationship and she's going to leave her husband, you know, let's say there's domestic violence involved, is it wrong to mislead him? Is it wrong to try and get him out of the house so you can leave?